Okay, I'm Michael Martinez of SEO Theory, and I've got Kent Yunk here with Rolling Pajamas SEO. Hello, Kent.
Hello, Michael. How are you?
I'm good. So this is Saturday, June 25th for us. Not sure when you guys will get to see it. I'm already behind on one video, but I'll try and get that out this weekend. In any event, Kent was talking to me before we got on the broadcast about the latest SEO Theory Premium newsletter. He was interested in a couple of topics, and so I guess we'll start out with correlation studies. I went on kind of a rant. I'm not gonna say why, but I'm not very happy with the way web marketers use correlation studies because they use them completely incorrectly. But Kent, why don't you start this off by pre-positioning the discussion, because I can go on about correlation studies all day.
I think, well, number one, my experience with correlation studies has more to do with people using them as marketing tools, right? So if I have an SEO tool, if I have some kind of a tool that measures stuff, right? What I do is I try to gather a whole bunch of information and turn it into a correlation study and tell you why having my tool makes you smarter, right? So
Right.
that's the impression that I get from these, and some of the data is more compelling than other data. I mean, I think if you spend any time doing your own analytics and you work with people that are really smart, often what you will find is that no matter how much data you have available, people can poke holes in it and find that, while you are measuring data, actually creating some kind of a actionable finding is a little bit more difficult, right? And
Right.
so these correlation studies that come up from these SEO organizations, SEO tool companies, or in this case, whatever the SEO sort of widget is that people are selling, the correlation data often tries to convince you that 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever the number is of SEO tactics is the right thing to do, right? And it will result in something that has showed up in the correlation study, right?
Yes.
So it gives you a reason and some kind of justification to go and apply some changes or tactics that you can employ that you hope will result in the same thing that was shown in the correlation study. I think that's my impression of it. And the challenge, I think, is that when you look at these correlation studies, there's never enough data, right? Number one, to actually show true correlation. Plus,
Right.
they don't know what the back end, what the actual, they don't know enough about the ranking that they're trying to improve, i.e. Google and Google's algorithms, or Bing and Bing's algorithms. There's not enough information about how that works on the back end to be able to apply the correlation data to that algorithm to say that, yes, one change here turned into that result there. I mean, there's a lot of assumptions that get made, and I think it's a head scratcher for me, because sometimes I look at that and I go, I'm not sure how I mean, it's interesting, but I'm not sure that they can make that
Yeah.
determination.
Well, I mean, all the correlation studies are nonsense. First of all, these guys don't understand how correlations work. Okay, so let's take this week's vote, the Brexit vote. A majority of the people in Great Britain voted to leave the European Union. Earlier this year, some scientists, some biologists announced that a population of some mammal in South America is now its own species. The speciation event occurred within the perspective of modern scientific observation. That's a correlation. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You have a small country breaking off from the European Union, and you have a small mammal population breaking off from the rest of the species. That's correlation. But they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. And that's usually what's going on in these SEO correlation studies. You can see a pattern over here, and you can see a pattern over here, and you think, well, okay, they must be connected somehow. Correlation study, if done properly, should show that there is a connection, because your two types of data will follow just roughly the same trend over some series of data points or something like that. And there can be minor variations and things like that. Now, but all that does is show that as the top thing moves, the bottom thing moves in the same general direction. It doesn't explain why. It doesn't imply why. It doesn't confirm why. It doesn't do anything in terms of reverse engineering the process or processes that cause the correlation study, because nature often repeats the same patterns in many different ways for many different reasons, and it just falls out that way. It's the laws of physics or whatever you want to call it. And so you have a population breaking off over here and a population breaking off over here, but they're not breaking off for the same reasons. And there's no fact that they happen about the same time, and other things that seem to correlate doesn't mean that there's any connection. One recent SEO study looked at H1 headers on web pages, and they looked at a large number of search results for who knows what kind of queries. Let's assume they were all high volume queries pulled out of the AdWords keyword planner tool, right? With the API. So that right there creates a bias that we don't even have to talk about. But let's just accept that the data is biased, and biased data is going to produce some funky patterns. And then they now I'm going to make up a number because I don't want to go look at the actual study again, but they quoted some percent of websites that appeared in these search results do not have H1 headers. And so they said there's a high correlation between not having H1 headers and ranking well or not ranking well or something like that. To do that right, to show that there is a real correlation, you'd probably have to have 95 to 98% of web pages in those search results either using H1s or not using H1s. And it was down in the mid-range somewhere. So there is no correlation, but they called it a correlation anyway. So what these guys are doing is they're making the mistake of saying, well, I've got this percentage scale that the statistical tool I'm using it is generating stuff for, and if it goes up to like 45% or 50%, I can call that a weak correlation or a median correlation. I think that's a term that some people use, but that's not the way it works. The fact that you have, say, a 70% comparative performance in one trend line versus another trend line doesn't mean that they're correlated. In fact, 30% differentiation is really bad. I mean, that kind of busts all hope of finding a correlation. There are of course extra computations that you can run on your correlation data, but what they're looking for is a definition of reliability of the study, not confirmation that your interpretation of the findings is correct. Mm-hmm. And so I'm being intentionally vague about all the terms and terminology that goes into this, because people are impressed by charts. And there was a scientific study. I read an article, I think it was last year, where I linked to this study at the bottom of the article, and I'd made up these charts at the top, and people were impressed with the charts. They seemed to intuitively match whatever it was that they thought they were seeing. And my point was, you'll believe any bullshit as long as it's presented with a chart. And this scientific study actually found that people are easily swayed by anything that has a chart with it. So nobody goes to check the data to see if it's legitimate or to validate the data, much less to check the analysis that's run against the data. They just say, oh, there's a chart, I'm going to believe it, and they fall for whatever bullshit is coming out of it. So when someone who's ignorant of how correlation is really used in a scientific discussion, starts running correlation studies, and they're looking for ways to talk about how to influence search results. If as long as they put a chart up with their study, a lot of people are going to believe that they found something useful. And the charts, so far, these correlation studies have not shown anything statistically significant. Statistical significance is itself kind of a debatable area in terms of the value that it has. But if people want to reverse engineer Google's algorithm, they're going to have to use something other than correlation studies, because a correlation study looks at two variables, and the Google algorithm has multiple variables, hundreds, according to Google. And so you can't use a regression analysis to figure out how the algorithm works. What you can use a regression analysis to do is to figure out if a change that you've made to a website has somehow reacted badly with whatever the search system is. And so you can undo that change. But all that tells you is that doing this, knocking on this wall with your website, is not good for your website. That's not telling you that knocking on that wall is bad for every website. And of course, that's a mistake that a lot of people make because the algorithms are so complex. It's the combination of signals that they get from this website that causes this thing to break the camel's back. That's the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so we manage over 100 websites for ourselves, plus a number of websites for our clients. And we see this all the time, where we do one thing on one website that breaks it, but we're doing the same thing on a dozen other websites, and it doesn't break it. So I don't know if that's where you wanted me to go with correlation analysis. There is a new paper that I did link to or I linked to an article about the new paper, series of papers in the newsletter. Two academic researchers have devised what they call is a technique that actually makes correlation study or correlation analysis scientifically acceptable for determining cause and effect. But so far, they're the only two people on Earth to have used this technique. And although it's caused a stir in the statistical measurement community, if you want to call that, it hasn't been vindicated yet. So up until 2016, all uses of correlation studies have been understood not to show cause and effect, ever. Okay, there is no way using current correlation study tools that you can show cause and effect. It's not a scientifically valid argument. In 2016, somebody may have come up with a technique where they can use a set of correlation studies, go in and analyze those studies with this new technique to try and prove cause and effect. So that right there is an indictment against all of the correlation studies that SEO tool vendors and marketers and conference presenters, put on. But these people are not aware of what's going on in real math and in statistical analysis, and they're never going to do more than pay lip service. They'll throw in that stupid correlation is not causation, right? Disclaimer into all their studies, and that just it infuriates me to see people wasting everyone else's time with these kinds of studies because they don't show anything useful ever. What they show is that someone spends a lot of time looking at data without any real idea of what to do with that data. They're trying to be clever, and they could actually take a lot of this data, and instead of trying to reverse engineer the algorithms, they can look at what's going wrong with a specific website and say, well, all of these websites over here are doing this thing. This website just started doing this thing and it didn't work. There may be a reason why it broke here, and so this coordinate, that's not the word that I want, but the uncorrelated results should point to a deeper problem. I mean, correlation. A lot of scientists use correlation studies to point to something that needs further study or not. Correlation studies are kind of like a way to vet an idea. If you don't see a correlation between two variables, then there's probably no reason to go and dig any deeper into any possible relationship between those two variables, because there is no relationship. That's there's no standards in the SEO industry.
Right? Yes, there are no standards. You know,
Make-
it is the wild, wild west.
Makes us all look like a bunch of charlatans.
Well, and there are a lot of very unscrupulous SEOs out there that are peddling snake oil.
Yeah. I mean, they've heard the criticisms for enough years that they can't plead ignorance on that subject. They just say they disagree with what people who are better informed than they are say.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't pin that disagreement on the better informed people. They pin that disagreement on whoever is directly criticizing them. So you could be quoting all the statistical experts in the world telling me I'm wrong. All I have to do is say, well, I disagree with you. And I'm, by implication, I'm not disagreeing with all the experts in the world because I'm just disagreeing with you.
Right.
So appeals to authority don't actually win arguments, but they sure do convince gullible people. At any event, I don't know what else I can say about correlation studies. They're just not worth anybody's time.
Well, I think we've said enough. I think really what we have to do is take it as marketing, and most marketing has some level of hype in it.
Yeah.
You know, it's designed to accomplish a goal, and often that goal is create customer loyalty, or get new customers, or build, you know, potential leads. I mean, it's, you know, there's a purpose for building this, you know, content. So,
but it does have the unfortunate effect of poisoning the value of search engine conferences. Web marketers put on lots of conferences every year, and every time they present a correlation study, you know, at these conferences, they basically are wasting, you know, they're taking money from their audience for nonsense. And it invalidates the concept behind the conference, which is to try and improve the way the industry works. And what they're doing is they're spreading misinformation and you know, creating a false mythology that just holds everybody back. I mean, this is why we go through wave after wave after wave of Google penalties and, you know, search algorithm adjustments and things like that. And every year, thousands of people are upset because their websites have lost traffic. Why? Because there are no standards, and they'll believe any clever presentation in a slideshow with a chart or something like that just has no scientific validity. The last 15 to 16 years of search conferences have really been a waste of time and money. That just are not teaching people good principles. They're teaching bad principles, and they're just leading to the next round of lost traffic or penalties or whatever people want to call it.
well, I think so. As an alternative to doing correlation studies, I think case studies are great because they do speak to, hey, we had this site, and either it had a problem or it didn't have a problem. It just, you know, they wanted something to change on it, and they applied some principles, and they saw a result.
Yes.
And I think from that perspective, I think it's more productive to do case studies and present case examples, just like you would if you went to a medical conference, right? Medical conference, you get, you know, people that have done specific procedures and have seen X amount of performance improvements, or some variables worked and other variables did not work. But at least in that situation, you're only presenting that time-stamped scenario that only, I mean, even in that scenario, you can say, hey, here are all the sort of elements that are true about the site, you know, age of domain, you know, how long the website's been up, and, you know, all of the sort of technical details about it, and then sort of map that to, you know, if you have a similar site that has these similar issues or similar objectives, then you can apply these principles and potentially have a similar, if not the same, result, right?
It's easier for people to sandbox a case study finding than it is for them to sandbox a correlation study finding. Correlation study sounds scientific. It's pseudoscientific, but it sounds scientific. A case study is not trying to present itself as scientific. I mean, certainly a scientist can do a case study, but a scientific case study is subject to peer review, and it's written much more rigorously. Anybody can do a case study, and the quality of the case study may vary by the writer, but it still sheds useful information about a personal experience that people can compare their own experiences to, without having to worry about, well, am I like within the standard deviation of whatever, you know. They don't bring all the statistic terminology into the discussion. It's just, here's what I did with my website, here's what happened, this is my conclusion. People are free to disagree with the conclusion, and if they try this on their own websites, their results may be different. I'm not promising anything. There are some people who will look at a case study, particularly if it's published on a website like Search Engine Land or Moz, and they'll say, oh, well, this case study, proves this. And case studies don't prove anything. So there are still some people who misunderstand what the value is in a case study. But the thing about a case study is, it's following a case study is more actionable. It's easier to follow, to replicate, if they give you enough information, what goes on in the case study, than it is to take whatever is in the correlation study and try to do something with it. I mean, if somebody is downloading 2 million search results, I mean, what can you do with that on your website? There's really nothing that you can do, especially if they don't tell you what the queries were. The search results are constantly changing anyway, and they are presented in a different format for different locations. So these huge volumes of search result data that the correlation studies work with are pretty much hybrid collections of multiple sources that don't, they're blending data from multiple sources, and they have no real value to determining what's going on in the search results. So a case study, at least, you can say, here's where I was, here's what I did, and here's where I am now. This is what I think happened. And then everybody else can go through that and say, okay, I agree or I disagree with you. Let me try it on my website, and we'll see what happens there. If nothing else, trying to replicate someone else's case study gives you experience. And we build our practices on our experience. We should not be building our practices on the basis of charts that are put into slideshow presentations and case studies. That's just why a lot of people get into trouble with their websites, because they're trying to do what they've been told to do through unscientific presentations.
Well, now this sort of brings up a whole different set of tool vendors, right? So what I wanted, I find myself sort of getting bombarded by a lot of companies that will have these great WYSIWYG tools where you throw in the data and it gives you a way to sort of visualize that data in multiple ways. I mean, it's sort of, Excel on steroids, but what they do is they deal with the data differently than an Excel file does, and so therefore they're able to do more work with larger buckets of data, and there are a whole bunch of them, and I worry because suddenly you've got people that are not truly data scientists now using these tools, and if not used correctly, they're making actionable decisions based on data that may be lacking a variable, right?
Right.
And so the good news is, hey, there are more data visualization tools out there. Bad news is, in the wrong hands, the data may not be what it should be.
And one of the problems that I see with companies that are investing in big data analysis is they are looking to hire, what you call a data scientist. That's an emerging field. There are only a few university degrees in data science at the present time. Most of these people are coming out of statistics and related fields. But companies will invest in hiring a team of data scientists, and then they will give them a mandate, go do this. And the danger in that, I'm not saying that the companies are doing it wrong, because I'm not in a position to judge who's doing it right and who's doing it wrong at that enterprise level or anything like that. But the danger that's presented there is that some executive decision can easily force those data scientists to prove a case. And we see this in the pharmacological, pharmaceutical, I don't know what it is, the people who make drugs, the pharmaceutical industry. They do this all the time. And, you know, they present the results that justify bringing their drugs to market. And, you know, it's the responsibility of authorities like the Food and Drug Administration to sort of cut through the bullshit and figure out what the real science is trying to say. Sometimes they don't do it until after the drugs come to market, you know, because the FDA has rescinded certain licenses for certain drugs over the past 10 years because they turned out to be based on bullshit. But they're, you know, that's a problem that has been around corporate America for ages. You know, the tobacco industry, yeah, they definitely buried the real science for decades. And the energy industry, they've had their own, you know, their own issues. All of these industries have hired real scientists coming out of the university system for decades. And the science is always at risk of being subverted for the marketing purposes. So it would be incredibly naive to assume that companies that are hiring data scientists to come in and work on, you know, web marketing projects, if we want to simplify it that way, are not going to doctor the science with some sort of a mandate. And what do you do if you take the job? You maybe they should have more ethics course. I don't know. That's a really tough question to answer. I don't want to impugn, you know, the honor of people who have invested years in getting these degrees, but they're working for industries that are being run on the basis of how can we increase shareholder value. And, you know, shareholder value doesn't work very well with science that says what you're doing is not good for the population. So that's a real risk with data science. And there's a risk that's been there for a long, long time. I don't expect it to improve at all with internet measurements in general.
Well, and I think that's the sort of evil of statistics, right? Statistics can always be, you know, 4 to 5 dentists surveyed, right? I love that one. You know, I only talked to 6 dentists, so 4 out of 5 of them, you know, like my stuff.
Yeah.
So yes, and I think that is the challenge with marketing, right? You got to pick. If left to your own devices, you'll pick the right buckets of data so that it shows what you want it to show.
Well, I mean, the pure marketer's responsibility is to tell the best story.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, nobody wants their marketing department to go out and say, "Don't buy our products," you know, unless they're compelled to by a recall or something. But so, I mean, you know, it's just understood that the marketing group is going to take whatever they're given, and they're going to come up with the best possible story that they can, doing their best to avoid getting the company sued. Doesn't always work out that way, but that's the marketing department's responsibility. And to a certain extent, you kind of have to let them slide on that, because that mandate doesn't come from within the marketing department. That mandate comes from up here, the executive team or the proprietor, you know, whoever it is. They're out there saying, tell the best story about this product or this service, and the marketing. That's what the marketing department's job is to do. So I don't blame the marketers industry so much as I blame everybody who's invested in search engine optimization for not insisting on standards, because standards would have protected thousands upon thousands of companies from the unnecessary failures and setbacks that they've experienced over the last 20 years. You know, there's just so many things. So many companies went out of business over Panda and Penguin because they did it wrong. And they did it wrong because they were told to do it wrong by the people at the conferences and on the blogs. You know, the experts in the industry told everybody how to do it wrong. And they did that because there are no standards. There's no science involved in this. And I have been one of a few voices through the years, you know, to keep pointing out we need some standards. Consumers, business owners, decision makers, they don't know what is good and what is bad. They don't have any way to measure good or bad. And the poor guy that's trying to learn SEO so that he can just feed his family is going to go through the same series of mistakes that the generation before him went through. We're probably into the 7th or 8th generation of SEO technicians right now, and they're still making the same stupid mistakes that people were making 16 years ago.
Oh yeah.
Because they don't know any better. There's nobody out there holding the line on what really works, because every time somebody comes up with a cool new idea, they've got to go out and make money off of it and sell it, and it's all about the hype. It's not about what really works.
Yeah, you got that right. I completely agree, and I struggle a little bit. I mean, I've even run into marketers who think they know SEO, who will tell me point blank that you just let the search engine do its job and don't do any changes to your metadata, because we want the search engine to determine what's best. And I'm, what do you say to that? They're like, okay, you clearly know what's best for your company. I'm happy to not work with you. So it's challenging because, like you said, I think people go to these conferences, they read, what supposedly is the information du jour, and it may or may not be valid, or certainly not supported by real experience.
Or they're interpreting real experience incorrectly. I'm someone who has advocated not using metadata in certain situations.
Mm-hmm.
But I've also used metadata in a lot of situations. I think that the lack of standards causes us to send confusing signals, because there's nothing for me to refer back to except my own writings. If somebody comes to me with a website that's got 200,000 pages of content, and all the meta descriptions are identical, what's the fastest fix that I can suggest, other than to delete all the meta descriptions? But that's not the end of it. I don't say, well, don't ever write meta descriptions again, but get rid of the duplicate stuff, and then you go in and you fix what's important to you, and just work your way down the priority list. I think that sometimes that part of the message is lost because people hear, well, okay, I don't mean meta descriptions. And that wasn't really my intention when I first brought that up a few years ago. My intention was, if you're generating automatic meta descriptions that are all the same, that's not helping you, and it is hurting you.
Mm-hmm. Right.
There are a lot of websites that generate the same page title, same meta description. Google has a filter that looks at that, and it says, well, I don't have time to compare all these pages. I'm just going to assume they're all duplicate. And so you get, there's no penalty, but in the search results, they just pick one because everything else looks the same. And that, of course, is why you want to differentiate your page titles and your meta descriptions. That should have been a no-brainer all along, but it wasn't, and it's still not. And it's in part because web marketing is such a complex formula. I don't know, calculation, something system. Not everybody can know what everybody else knows. So the meta information picture is far more complicated than most people realize.
Mm-hmm.
And there's stuff that you do for Facebook that really has nothing to do with Google.
Right.
And if someone who's inexperienced with Facebook optimization comes in and looks at all this stuff, they might say, why do you have all this crap on the page? It's just, well, it's there for Facebook. There's stuff that you can do for site search. You can put a site search tool on your website that uses the keywords meta tag. People look at that keywords meta tag and they go, well, this is bad SEO. And in fact, it's good SEO. It's very good SEO. It's
actually really good. Yep. Yeah. So, and I've worked with big sites to do exactly that, right? help them with their site search. So yeah, I think that's the challenge is, you know, you can take, I think in some ways the Google Webmaster Guidelines probably provide some amount of sort of basic, you know, this is how the game is played.
Kind of an acid test. Yeah.
Yeah, but there's so much more that has evolved out of that. And you know, do you think that Google should go back and rewrite the guidelines and say, you know, here are the rules that everybody should play by?
No, because Google only drives about 10%, maybe less, of all web traffic. And, you know, site search is the big player on this field, always has been, always will be. But unfortunately, the SEO industry has been very slow to recognize that. It's only in the last year or so that I've started to see some major names talk about the value of site search. I've been talking about it for years. And it's site search is really where the action's happening, because once you get people onto your website, if they can't, if it's a big website and they can't find what they're looking for, they need a tool that's going to do what Google didn't do for you. Okay, it's great that Google sent you the traffic, but if they're still searching, then Google failed. And people don't get that. They don't understand that Google fails most of the time. And so they're relying on Google for site search too, which is it just blows me away. Sure, it's cheap and free and easy. I mean, we have a few websites that are still using Google custom search engines for site search, but really, if Google didn't get you to the right page the first time, a custom search engine is not going to get you there the second time, and it's actually a worse search experience than regular Google. And so site search is really the big complicating factor that a lot of websites struggle with. And if you want to put keywords metadata in your pages to enhance your site search, there should be nobody in the SEO industry who objects. Okay, you know, Bing has said that they might hold the keywords against you, but most people don't even care about Bing. I mean, you know, we have websites that get good traffic from Bing. We have websites that don't get good traffic from Bing. But that's a problem Bing has to solve for itself. If I put a tool on my websites that needs a keywords meta tag, and I'm going to take the time to fill out that keywords meta tag, then screw Bing. My site search is more important than Bing's web search. So that's where we've done more than 30 minutes here. I guess you got me going again. I don't know.
I love the fact that you're so passionate about it, and certainly I learn something every time we have one of these. So great communicating with you, and great sharing what we know and what we've experienced with the audience.
Yeah, I have ideas for what I'm going to do with these videos, and I never follow up on them. But I would love to take questions from the audience for these videos. And yeah, Kent has been borrowing ideas from the newsletter. We do take questions from newsletter subscribers. I might try to figure out a way for people to submit questions for the videos. It's basically just putting a form on the website or something like that. So I'll take a look at that in the near future. At any rate, thanks a lot, Kent, and I hope you have a good weekend. And,
thank you, Michael, and same to you. I hope the weather's nice there. It's gorgeous here.
It's very warm here, which is, I guess, better than wet and cold. So,
agreed.
All right, talk to you next week.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.